Good morning and welcome to the Capital Group and GovTech's YouTube channel. I'm Kevin FitzPatrick, CEO of the Government Technology Insurance Company. Today, we're going to spend the next 60 minutes together covering a high-level overview of CMMC, its history, and the 5 levels of CMMC compliance that you need to be concerned with. We'll be discussing how CMMC impacts contractors that are seeking to do business with the Department of Defense, where contractors are today in the overall process, and what they need to do to achieve compliance. We're also going to touch base on why third-party certification has become mission critical and the importance of showcasing compliance in your proposal responses. Last but not least, we're going to save time for questions and answers throughout today's webinar. I'll be monitoring your questions via the chat feature, and I promise you, we're going to get to as many of them as possible. Our subject matter experts have graciously agreed to follow up with you on any questions that we can't get to before the end of today's webinar. Now, I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panel of experts. We're pleased to be joined today by Dr. Dennis McCallum, a former Northrop Grumman senior security professional and recognized security subject matter expert on the development and the deployment of cybersecurity technology. He is currently an adjunct professor at both the United States Naval Academy and George Mason University, and has been a United States appointed delegate with NATO technology committees for over 15 years. Also joining us today, Brian DeMuth, founder and CEO of GRIMM, and Andrew Beardall, in-house general counsel at the Capital Group and chief operating officer of the Government Technology Insurance Company. Andrew is a graduate of Catholic Law School and holds a graduate degree in molecular biology. So without further delay, I'm going to introduce Andrew here. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it, and looking forward to this discussion here. So we are going to be talking about the CMMC. And what is it? What does that stand for? Well, the CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It's a standard that's been promulgated by the Department of Defense to deal with controlled unclassified information. Now, why is it necessary? Because there is a great deal of vulnerability in the contracting world. Adversarial folks aren't going to be going after Lockheed or Northrop Grumman. They have $1 bazillion to spend on security, but where is the weak point? Well, it would be their subcontractors and their subs and the like. And with that lower level of security, that opens them up to data theft, monitoring, identity theft, and that vulnerability is something that the government just does not want. Now, before this, there was 800-171 promulgated by NIST. It created a cybersecurity standard. The problem with that, though, is it was self-certified. It required a company to check itself. And companies have been less than diligent in that. They do the minimum they had to, or they check the box so they could get the contract. But some of the necessary security procedures were not implemented. So the government's determined that this higher standard is necessary. And it's starting with the Department of Defense. Now, what's different about CMMC than 800-171? Well, first, and most importantly, it's going to require outside certification. So if you are a government IT contractor, rather than just checking the box yourself, someone else is going to have to check that box for you, and they are going to go over your work. They're going to make sure that your work is compliant, and if not, you won't be cleared. There are also different tiers that are being introduced, because depending on the level of your work, depends on the level of your work, rather, depends on what level of cybersecurity you're going to need. If you're mowing the lawns at the Pentagon, that's a very, very different exposure than someone who's controlling tens of thousands of records for the VA. So needless to say, they created a tiered system, which my friends Brian and Dennis are going to go into in much greater detail. But those tiers are based on the nature of the work that you do and your access to sensitive information. So how can a company get compliant? There are 3 different ways. The first is you do it yourself. Right? You institute the cybersecurity standards on your own, and you hire a certified third party to check the box for you. Now, the beauty of that is it's the least expensive. However, it's also got the greatest margin for error. And your staff may not have the specialized skills necessary to bring you into compliance. Now, secondly, you use a partial third-party thing. You hire an outside cyber assessment firm to come in and take a look at what your vulnerabilities are, provide you a report, and give you the standards with which you have to comply. Then you do all the work to get into compliance with them, and then you hire hire a third party to certify you. It's in between costs, but you got to juggle various different outside entities. And again, your company, your internal folks may not have the skill set necessary. The final option is to do a turnkey third party situation where you've got a third party that you hire that'll do the assessment, implementation, and certification. Now, that's going to be your most expensive option, but it's also going to give you the highest probability that everything is done properly. And a good third party will take care of things like educating your personnel, making sure all of your rules and regulations are in compliance, and bring you up to speed so that when the certification comes, you'll be ready to go. Now, this was supposed to be implemented over the course of this year. They released some of the guidelines in 2019, and implementation has been ongoing this year. Now, as you can imagine, a few things have been tweaked because of the coronavirus, but this is happening and this is coming. So that's an overview of it. I'm now going to hand this over to my colleagues, Dennis and Brian, and they are going to get down into the weeds. I encourage you, please, if you have any questions, type them into the comments on the YouTube page here so we can address them at the tail end of this presentation. Thank you very much. Brian, Dennis?
Thank you, Andrew. So many of you are probably wondering or have been researching, what is the next thing that I really need to do? What do I need to take on? And so, as Andrew pointed out, coronavirus and other delays in the process have obviously held up the full implementation of this. We have things like, we don't fully know who the third-party assessor organizations are that are approved. Those haven't come out yet. We don't have independent validators that are approved yet. We're still waiting on those things from the CMMC AB, which is the board that's managing this along with the DoD. And we're still waiting to hear more about very specific things and timelines based on the impacts from coronavirus. However, if you're like GRIMM, the company that I run, you already have clients that are telling you, you immediately have to start implementing additional things, which of course we have done. So the best thing to do to start, and where we're going to start in our slides here, if we could jump to slide 10, is really talking about that NIST SP Special Publication 800-171 that Andrew referenced. So this has been around for a while now, and most were expected to have already implemented this if you are working with controlled unclassified information. So most of what CMMC and 800-171 are about initially is really ensuring that controlled unclassified information, information that when put together with other pieces of information could be damaging to the United States government. That's kind of what we're talking about here. And so in order to ensure that you are meeting those requirements and are ready for what's coming with CMMC, you really need to begin, if you haven't already started a self-assessment for 800-171, you really need to start that now. Most of the larger DoD contractors and many of the government contracts where this type of information or classified information is included as part of the work that you perform, they're already requiring you to submit these assessments. In fact, most of these contracts are actually requiring you to submit by November 30th. So we're rapidly approaching that date. So let's go through the scoring methodology real quick for that initial SP 800-171. So you have basic, which is your self-assessment, really going and comparing your system security plan to NIST 800-171. We're going to get into a little bit more about the SSP, the system security plan, as we go through this discussion here. But if you don't know what that is, or you do not have one, and you use CUI or other classified information as part of what you do to perform for the government as a service organization, then you really need to have one very quickly. So I would recommend that you go out and look at all the great resources that OSD, DISA, NIST have on their websites about how to meet the 800-171 requirements. So there's 110 controls that you have to understand. There are checklists. There are a number of example SSPs and other things that are provided to you on these websites. There's also a number of organizations out there that are providing turnkey plans and options for your purchase. And there's a number of companies like GRIMM that do cybersecurity assessments that can come in and do both true system and network assessments and assessments of your compliance and your policies. So the next next scoring step really is medium, where a government organization really reviews your SSP and your self-assessment to see where you're at. Everyone expects that after you submit these self-assessments on November 30th, or hopefully soon after, that there will be reviews of people of contractors, of companies that are at a certain level or higher in terms of the importance and the concern, the national security concern around the information that you have access to. For that high level, you very well will be looking at assessors and the government coming to assess on-site at your location. And then CMCC really concretes that into place. And so you will definitely have those third-party assessor organizations that will be coming to your site to assess. So let's go on to slide 11 and kind of talk about what CMMC levels you might need. So Andrew, talking about the difference between, if you're a service contractor that's, say, mowing the grass outside the Pentagon or some other facility, or if you're a cybersecurity defense organization that is supporting maybe United States Cyber Command, there's a big difference in the level of CMMC and the importance of the data that you have access to. So level 1 is essentially means that you can safeguard your federal contract information. There very well may be sensitive information in your federal contract. So that needs to be protected, because if combined with other outside sources, that might be able to build a picture for an adversary that they could understand something that is much more sensitive than the information that you have access to. So level 1 is really to address that need. And then level 2 is really a transitional step that is moving from level 1 to level 3. Level 3 in CMMC is very closely aligned to the 800-171. So going through that self-assessment, or even bringing in a third party that is experienced in assessing 800-171 controls within your organization is probably a good way that you can prepare yourself to meet the CMMC level 3. There will be some other nuance and some other controls that will be added into level 3, but it's very closely aligned to 800-171. So if you pay close attention to 800-171 now, it's probably the best thing you can do to prepare yourself for your CMCC needs. Now, if you're working maybe in the intelligence community side of DoD, or working with information that is very much of interest to advanced persistent threats. So think nation state level actors that want the information that you may have access to through classified things that you might do, that you probably have controlled unclassified information, or most definitely have controlled unclassified information that's inside of your contracts, that are inside of your monthly status reports for those contracts that you're servicing or that you want to service. You have information, whether you understand it yet or not, you have information that is of great interest to other nation state actors. So without a doubt, if you have that level of, if you're providing that level of support or want to, there's a very good chance that you're going to need to meet a level 4, level 5. So moving on to slide 12 here, our visual. Dennis, do you mind telling the folks here that are listening to us what's actually included in each of these levels?
Sure, Brian, thank you. Let's start out with some good news. If you are dealing, like Brian said, either in the intelligence area, you're dealing with something with processing, you're developing algorithms and things like that, you are probably halfway to level 5 right now. But let's look at each level individually. At level 1, we're really talking about basic cyber hygiene, and it's 17 controls that are out of the NIST 853, specifically pointed out in 171, but they are very basic controls. A lot of them are things that can either be set with by an administrator in Active Directory, it's an outside plan or something. My personal experience has been that most people already have robust antivirus programs. They have robust anti-malware programs. They have been very aware of what's going on with spyware. They're doing education right now and other things. That really moves you to the level 3 area. That's 130 of the 171 practices right there. So taking a look at that, I mean, it's not something you should be totally scared of. These are things you're doing right now. The idea of CMMC is to come in and ensure that there is a continuity that goes on, that everybody is operating at the same level, and that the threat can't necessarily come in and pick somebody who is a supplier to a supplier to a supplier to the prime contractor and get in and destroy a program or steal information from a program that way. So 1, don't be scared. 2, certainly use somebody who's very familiar with these practices to come if you don't understand them and work through it, but it's not a frightening thing to do. Brian.
All right, let's move on to slide 13. So really, let's sum this up for your pre-CMCC requirements here. So again, if you're operating with controlled unclassified information or federal contract information that might be used to build a bigger picture for an adversary, you really need to pay attention to this. And here's what you can do today. So the first thing, and like Dennis was saying, a lot of the 800-171 controls are things you probably already have. More than likely, and what I've seen in a lot of businesses is as you go in to look at and assess against what controls you have in place and what requirements you do or don't meet, you probably meet a lot of them, especially if you're already in an information technology field and providing that kind of service. You probably already meet a lot of these controls and have the systems in place for them. You might just need to wrap a system security plan, an SSP, around what you have today to really document what it is you're doing and what you need to do going forward. So there's quite a few, tools available to you out there. Several are available right from NIST and right from OSD and DISA. So I highly recommend that you pull down the 800-171 self-assessment or Appendix A and do a self-review of where you're at. Maybe have your IT manager or someone that has IT experience within your firm help you through that assessment. And then for those of you that are performing on contracts that definitely have CUI today, you're supposed to be submitting your self-assessment to the government through the Supplier Performance Risk System. There's a link here on the screen for it, or it's a link to instructions on how to submit. And then it's probably important to reach out to your prime contractors if you're a subcontractor on such contracts. Again, a dead ringer is if you have access to classified information as part of your contract, you have access to controlled unclassified information inside of your unclassified company systems through, again, the reports and everything else for your contract. So please take a look there. All right, let's move on to a little bit more about CMMC itself. So if we can move to slide 15. And this is really, again, we've covered most of this because the beautiful thing here that is aligned for you is 800-171 already is a good prep for what you need to do for CMMC. As Andrew and Dennis both have commented on at this point, a big part of CMMC is to force the requirement to ensure that everyone is truly implementing those 800, 171 controls, and then aligning some additional controls as you go up through the levels of CMMC. So I would say, your first phase here really is to go back and do what we've already said. Assess assess the level of CMMC that you need to be at. And that's going to be based on the contracts that you have or that you want to have, and ensure that you go out and find, as they become available and posted to the CMMC AB organization's website, find those assessors that have been approved to audit and assess. Again, today those aren't available, but we hope to see them. We hope to see people start showing up in those lists soon. And then again, conduct a gap assessment against that level that you believe that you need to be. One of the easiest ways, again, to start with that is to just pull those 800, 171 self-assessments down and review yourself and your organization against those. Remediation. So your next step is, again, if you don't have a system security plan for your company cybersecurity and you're supporting controlled unclassified information as part of what you're doing for the federal government, you are already behind the curve. So I recommend you go and start to put together a system security plan, and then create a remediation plan or a plan of actions and milestones. There are, again, a number of places where you can get example SSPs and POAMs to actually take you right through this process. And then the other thing that in business as a CEO, budgeting for the next several years ahead of us, right? Budgeting for next year and preparing for what the following years in terms of projections might look like. You really need to take a real look at the cost of all of this, because I'm sure as you start to look at what's required, especially if you're not doing any of it today, you'll realize that there's quite a bit of cost associated to this. There have been people saying the government's not going to pay for CMMC prep, and they're not going to pay to cover this, but that's not entirely true. Katie Arrington, Miss Arrington, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for DoD acquisition, has said at most of her briefings that they understand completely that federal contractors are going to integrate the budget costs into their forward provision rates. So go talk to your CFOs, talk to your finance folks, and integrate that budget coming from your IT and cybersecurity folks directly into what it's going to cost you to do business. The government's not going to directly pay for it. No, you integrate that into the cost of you doing business. So that's important under remediation to really pay attention to that. And then I'm sure Andrew will have some words for us when he comes back on about what other things you might want to consider in addition to budgeting for the pure costs of just running your cybersecurity plan. So next thing is preparing for the audit. You definitely want to have some dry runs, right? So that'll be required as part of what you bring in for these third-party assessors. You definitely want to have some dry runs internally and ensure that from a financial perspective, you understand the costs of this. From a IT perspective, you understand the impacts to your business. It's not just doing what CMCC requires of you. It's also ensuring that, well, like when you go to turn on your system and open your email, you want to ensure that you can still check your email wherever you actually have to do business from. And these types of cybersecurity things can and will create an impact to that. They can all be resolved by just ensuring that you plan out your cybersecurity plan in conjunction with your information technology plan. So then the next thing really is going to be, once we learn who those C3 PAOs and independent assessors are, you'll need to go out and bring them in at a cost to assess your organization and provide you that thumbs up that gets filed with the organizations managing CMMC. That's going to be very important. That unfortunately, we can't tell you exactly what you're going to need to do because it's not out there yet. It's coming soon. All right, Andrew, over to you. And Rob, I think we need slide 17.
Sorry, I was briefly on mute there. But
I meant to kick that over to Dennis. But Andrew, why don't you go ahead and comment on some of those costs?
Sure. Dennis, it's all you, buddy.
Okay. So again, with a little bit of good news, what the Department of Defense set up with the entire way to operate CMMC. They didn't just come up with a document, just toss it over the fence to you and say, hey, go figure this out, go do it yourself. There is an accreditation body. They are the overall guidance and control and management of the entire process, and they ensure how the evaluations are conducted so they are done uniformly, what the fidelity of the assessors are, and how to make sure that if you achieve a certain level and are certified at a certain level, that anybody that is at that level all has the same protection, so that we know that we're all dealing at the same level. And it's important because then we have no weakest link in the chain, so to speak. Rob, can you go to next slide, please, 18. So under the accreditation body, we have the third-party assessor organization. And really what that assessor organization does, this is who you would contract with. If you need to go get a certification, you would connect with them. They would help schedule the assessment. They assure that the certified assessors are in fact certified properly. They are trained properly, and they maintain that training as things progress. And then they manage the assessment itself, so that you really are having them run the entire assessment for you. After, as Brian previously said, you've probably done a dry run. You have a good idea of how this is going to go. So this group comes in, you are contracting with them. They handle all the scheduling, and they make sure the right people are there to do it. Next slide, please. So the next area that comes out of CMMC are the licensed training providers. And really what they do is to make sure that there is uniform curriculum in here that is taught across the board. And it's interesting because you want to maintain this body of knowledge online for all of you to go use and reference and be up to date, so that you know what has to be done and how things might have changed. They also ensure that the certification exams are properly delivered, properly proctored, and properly graded, and that assessors meet a certain level of criteria. And as you can see, there are 5 different things that you can be within the training area. Certainly the certified instructors are the most important, and several cyber academies that I've been associated with want to make sure at least that the baseline of the people giving the education is as good as the people who are going to be doing the assessment, and then make sure that this gets delivered to the students. Next one, please. So finally, the licensed partner publisher, that actually develops the curriculum. So as you can see here, it's slightly a federated thing within CMMC, where we have policy being set in one area, requirements and development being done in another, and assessment being done in a third, all within this framework, to make sure that we get the best material taught by the best instructors that give us the best set of assessors that we can have, to make sure that we maintain this uniform capability. So Brian, or Andrew, now over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Dennis. I appreciate it. So what happens when all of this doesn't work? What happens when you still have a breach or some kind of an incursion into your systems? And that brings us to the topic of cybersecurity insurance, cyber insurance. Now, that provides a safety net for you, because should there be some kind of an incident, as you can imagine, the DoD or other government agencies will not be happy. And you need that safety net to pay all the costs that are going to be included in this. And what are the costs of a breach? Well, first off, there's the direct costs, right? What's it going to cost you to repair the breach system, to reconstruct your data? Or what if it's a ransomware type thing and you need to pay a ransom? What are those direct costs, and how are you going to pay for them? Because if you don't have insurance for it, you're going to pay for it out of pocket. Then come the regulatory costs. Well, every government contract, if there's any type of a data breach, you're going to have to report it. And not only are you going to have to report it, you're going to have to report it along with a forensic exam of how it happened and how you can avoid it happening again. Now, if you happen to have $50,000 to $75,000 just sitting in your pocket, you can pay for that forensic exam. Otherwise, you might want to hand that off to your cyber insurance. And the notification and the legal costs that go with that are another component of the regulatory aspect that will just be a drain on your pocketbook. And then you have indirect costs, your reputational damage. Are you going to hire a spin doctor, someone to help you with publicity? How are you going to handle those financial burdens that will come down on your company? So how can insurance protect you? First thing, most important thing to understand is that not all cyber insurance programs are equal. As you know, there are types of insurance that we all have. Auto insurance, homeowners insurance. When I added my teenage son to my auto insurance, right, he was a 16-year-old male B student who was going to be driving his grandfather's powder blue Toyota Camry. And I called Geico and I told them that. And they have tens of thousands of data points on 16-year-old boys, on B students, and on powder blue Toyota Camrys from the early 2000s. They took all those data points together and they were able to give me a number right away because they have a very good understanding of how teenage boys drive powder blue cars. However, cybersecurity is the Wild West. There is no vast pool of information, of actuarial data, anything along that line. In fact, for the last few years, actuaries have been throwing darts at dartboards, more or less, to try and figure this out, just because the data isn't there yet. So you are going to find policies that advertise themselves as cyber policies, and maybe they contain data breach, or maybe they have cyber extortion, or maybe they have ransomware or malicious software. Maybe they cover forensic costs, maybe they don't. What you have companies doing is cherry picking a couple things, one or two things, or very robust things, putting them all together and calling it their cyber policy. So it is extremely important for you to ask what's included in this cyber policy. If someone spoofs my email and I send something to the wrong company, the wrong bank account, am I covered by my cyber policy? If you don't know the answer to that, ask your agent. And if your agent doesn't know the answer to that, find another agent. Because as we've talked about, this is such a big, important factor that the government is creating a standardization for it, which means you should at least pay enough attention so that your company doesn't take it on the chin. Now, there are various kinds of policies. Some people, some carriers, just throw a cyber add-on to their professional liability policy. That's a terrible idea. Professional liability is something that is outward facing. It is if you are, or one of your agents is somehow negligent in the performance of your duties to a third party, and that third party sustains damages. Whereas cyber insurance is very inward looking. How secure are your systems? How compliant are you with the CMMC? What's going to happen to your employees' information? So you should always get a separate cyber insurance policy. Plus, you're more likely to be hit by a cyber insurance claim than you ever are by a professional liability claim. So why let one torpedo sink two boats? If you have to file a cyber insurance claim, then your cyber rates are going to go up. But if you have a combined policy, your cyber rates and your professional liability rates are going to go up, and you don't want that. To harken it back to the car example, when my son crashed Grandpa's powder blue Toyota from the early 2000s, needless to say, insurance paid for it. And not only did his rates go up, but so did mine. And that's not okay, but I had to pay anyway. You don't want that to happen to your business. So what will a good cyber insurance policy cover? It'll cover data breach. It'll cover remediation of the damages. It'll cover forensic and notification costs. It'll cover cyber extortion. It will cover social engineering. Social engineering is quite the buzzword these days, but that means fraud. In the olden days, we would get an email from a Nigerian prince who wanted to move money through the United States. We all remember those days. And now it's become a lot more sophisticated. You will have a perfectly legitimate invoice from a subcontractor that you use. And then that subcontractor will send you a message saying, hey, I've changed banks, send my payments to here. You come to find out that that email saying that they've changed banks has been spoofed. And you've just sent the payment to that subcontractor, that $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 to the wrong bank account. And now you go back, and of course, that bank account is closed and someone's gone off somewhere with that money. That's social engineering. And you don't want that to happen. Now, the best thing you can do is create some policies and procedures that if there's ever a change in a bank account or something internally, if one of your employees ever says to your HR director, hey, I've changed bank accounts, that someone just picks up the phone and asks that question. That can save you a lot of heartache. But if someone doesn't do that, you want a good cyber insurance policy to kick in and cover you. Plus, when you are going to make your bids, when you're going to bid on contracts, showing that you are CMMC certified, and I know we're still waiting on the certifiers to do that, but showing that you're already CMMC certified gives you a leg up. Showing that you have insurance in place in case something goes wrong will give you a leg up. All of those things show that you, through your robust security plan that my friends here were talking about, are taking this seriously. And when you have contracting officers looking at your bids, they're going to look more favorably on someone who takes their cybersecurity seriously and isn't just checking the box. They're going to look more favorably on someone who is proactive rather than someone who wants to just get the contract and deal with it later. So if your agent cannot answer questions for you about cyber insurance, find another agent. It doesn't have to be us, though we'd certainly be happy to help you. But find someone who knows what they're talking about, because cyber risk is one of the handful of places where risk is going up all the time. Auto insurance risk, it's going down. Cars are safer. People are wearing their seatbelts. They aren't driving as much. Property risk is going down. Everything that's being built new has sprinklers in it and the like. But where are you finding more and more risk? In the cyber world, because people are constantly coming up with new ways to hack you, new ways to fool you, and new ways to steal from you. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm going to pass the baton back to my colleague Kevin and ask if you've got any questions, or if any questions are out there for us. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Brian, for the robust discussion here today. We do have a handful of questions that were pre-submitted and have just come in. Andrew, maybe you can lead us off here. Will CMMC spread to other agencies? Can we anticipate this going outside of the DoD?
I think we can. I think that the idea of more and more security is something that everyone in the government can agree on is a good idea. And in many ways, this is an agency level thing as opposed to a congressional level thing. So we don't have to necessarily worry about the legislature doing anything, but we can look forward to agency by agency, things becoming more and more secure. And I think you're going to find it first in things like DoD and Homeland Security, right? And then other places with lots of information, like Health and Human Services. HHS has tons of health information on millions of Americans. So I think it's going to go that way next. And, I think NOAA's probably going to be towards the end of it because they don't need as much security for where fish swim. But I do think it's going to work its way through all of the government over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, yes.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Another question that came in. Do I currently need to be certified to bid on a DoD contract, or will be in the near future? Maybe Brian, you can expand on that?
Absolutely. So there are a number of contracts that have come out recently that I know that I've looked at or bid on that do have several of the new FAR clauses or the adapted FAR clauses that require you to do 800 171, which has been happening for a while, as well as some of the CMMC requirements. Really, again, they all point you back to looking at the self-assessments. They add the clauses so that as you, like, let's say you bid on and win a 5-year contract, that 5 years from now, as you near the end of your contract, you are in fact required to meet the CMMC requirements. It's obviously understood in industry now that those assessors, those auditors, the people that actually will get you certified and compliant, they aren't available yet. So the expectation, and going back to the point that Andrew just made, the expectation that many of these contract offices have, or probably all of the contract offices have, are that you're doing everything you can at this point to ensure that you're ready, to ensure that you meet at least those immediate 800-171 requirements.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question, maybe Dennis, you can opine on this. How long is it anticipated to take from the time I reach out for that first time until I can achieve certification?
That is a difficult question, Kevin, because a lot of it's got to do with what is going to be the workforce and that's going to be providing the assessments and what's the line and everything else. So let me kind of foot stomp a little bit what Brian just said. Getting on board now, even at the self-assessment level, even at level 5, not only puts you ahead of the pack, but it also gives you a competitive advantage. And if you're working this now, and you're working this probably through, people like us who are helping you at the unofficial level, because the body hasn't been stood up in the final certification processes, you're ready to go. And that gives you a pretty strong case to move to the head of the line.
Terrific. No, thank you. And maybe a follow-up, Dennis, to that question is, when is the deadline to submit basic assessment to SPRS? And what is the impact of the November 30th, 2020 deadline?
Well, I think the second question kind of answers the first one a little bit. I mean, that is the current deadline. And so you should try and have something in at that point in time. I don't want to speculate beyond that, Brian. You may want to speculate a little bit beyond that, but I'd say, the more you can adhere to the deadlines that are there, the more that you can claim that you are trying to stay ahead of the curve and go by the rules, I think the better off you're going to be. But Brian, please feel free to comment here.
Absolutely. So I think the biggest point there is exactly that, what Dennis just said. Are you doing the right thing in regards to protecting information and putting a program in place, or expanding any program you currently have in order to meet these requirements? But more importantly, in order to ensure that your cybersecurity is mature enough to protect the government's information. If you're doing that, I can't promise you anything, but if you're doing that, I would suspect that you'll be looked on more favorably now than you will be if you're just going to wait and say, well, there's government agencies that don't meet this, which is true. And so I'm just not going to do anything until they do. My professional advice, that's a very bad thing for you to do. You should be paying attention and starting the process. It doesn't mean, find the most expensive consultant and the fastest process and throw everything in place all at once, because I would argue that you might create damage to your business if you do that. Instead, take it seriously, start your assessment now, submit your initial assessment to that portal by November 30th, and put a POAM in place, a plan of actions and milestones that's going to help you to fix that, and submit that with your self-assessment. If you can submit something that says, here's where I'm at today, I believe I meet 90 controls, I sort of meet the others, but I need to fix these things, and here's the schedule by which I'm going to adhere myself to. If you do that, I believe you'll be looked upon favorably. That doesn't mean that someone might say, well, you can't be awarded the most sensitive contract in the nation if you don't meet those today, because you might not be. But this is about starting to mature your cybersecurity. And if you're not there, just take an honest approach and move towards it.
Terrific. Well, terrific. Well, thank you, Brian. Well, that concludes our questions and our webinars for today. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our subject matter experts here for taking the time to join us. We are going to provide everybody who joined us today with a copy of today's recording and slide deck. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions in the interim. The contact information for the subject matter experts is going to be provided in the information that's sent out to everybody. So I wish everybody a safe and happy weekend and an upcoming Thanksgiving. And thank you again for joining GRIMM, the Capital Group, and GovTech Insurance for today's CMMC webinar.